we're very excited to greet and welcome William Meader. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Ooh, it's very loud. There we go. Yeah, it's nice to be back. It's been a year. And my subject today is a subject that's actually very tied into the entire philosophy of esotericism, and it has to do with the so-called 7 rays. And the esoteric philosophy is, it's a huge, ancient understanding of creation, of life, of evolution, and it begins with a fundamental principle. And I call it, in my book, I call it the primary principle. And that is that in the ultimate sense, there's just one thing. One living principle, one beingness. Some people call that God. Others call it Brahma. Others call it universal intelligence. Call it what you like. But that one beingness that underlies it all, for reasons that we cannot even fathom, has incarnated itself in and as cosmos. It's the one becoming the many. So in this philosophy, there isn't that view that there's a God out there and there's God and creation. It's not God and creation, it's God as creation. And God as creation is a whole different kind of paradigm for understanding who you are and your relationship to the larger living system of creation. In the ultimate sense, you are a spark of divinity. In the ultimate sense, you are the divinity you seek. But what's so interesting about this ancient view is that it's believed that when that one life, that one living principle, incarnates itself as cosmos, it begins by dividing itself into 7 qualities of itself, 7 aspects of itself. And that's what we call the 7 rays. And that these are not sequential like first ray is not above the second ray, above the third ray at all. The idea is that it's just a number system to understand 7 fundamental qualities. It's akin, by analogy, it's akin to white light. You know, we talk about the light of God. Well, imagine white light projecting itself through a prism, and it fragments itself into 7 colors of the visible spectrum. That's precisely, by analogy, how ancient esotericism views the entirety of creation. That the one life, in its process of initial manifesting itself, divides itself into 7 qualities of itself. And that all things in creation, everything is the manifestation of and densification of differing ratios of those 7 qualities in different mixes to create the diversity that we see. Why is that important to you? It's important to you because it is said that every human soul is found upon one of those rays. And to know your soul ray is to know the very reason of your being. Not just in this life, but for thousands of lives. And so I want to talk to you about these rays and how they play out in people today. I want to give you a feel for it. This is a very, very big subject, and I'm just going to give you a larger kind of overview. But you, as a soul, are on a ray line. And that your spiritual purpose, in the ultimate sense, has to do with bringing forth into your expression the fullness and the purity of that ray quality as a function of service to humanity. Because there's another subject in this philosophy called the laws of the soul. And there's the third law is called the law of service. Every human soul, when it seeks to express through the lower self, the personality, It seeks to do that, but the personality has to get out of the way, and that's the challenge. And in so doing, it wants to make an uplifting contribution to something beyond itself. That's service. But there are seven ways that is accomplished, or 7 patterns of consciousness through which that manifests. One way to look at these rays is look at them as lenses. When you're on a certain ray line, it means that you as a spark of life, as a beingness, that spark of life is looking out at the world through a lens, a ray lens. And that ray lens is how you perceive and organize your perceptions, and how you act and react according to the lens you're looking through. And these lenses are equal in value and in spiritual importance, but quite different. And they incline people to navigate their lives in different social contexts and career contexts even, according to the nature of their inner ray nature. Because you see, what's also very interesting, and I can't go down this too far, only to say at this point that it's not just people that this is the animating life principle within you. It's also, these rays are animating the life principle within larger living systems. For instance, every social institution, whether it's government, education, science, the arts, religion, all of those are categories of human consciousness. All of them have a higher and lower nature. All of them are struggling to transform their lower nature in support of their higher nature, just like you and me. And they are also ray-defined. For instance, worldwide, religion is said to be the outpicturing of the 6th ray. Government is 1st ray. Education is 2nd ray. There's a whole understanding of this, but why I bring that up is because whatever your ray is as a soul, and presuming that you're awakened to the soul, because the masses are not, it means that you, consciously or unconsciously, are likely to navigate your life, your commitment to serve, your commitment to make a contribution. You will tend to navigate your life toward the very social institutions and entities of society out there that are also resonating to that same ray. Like attracts like. So this is a huge subject. By the way, even nations are considered entities in this philosophy. The United States is not just a country, it's a being. And it has a soul ray. And it's a different soul ray than another nation. And so there's a whole body of study in this about understanding international relationships based upon rayological tendencies that are governing those nations. Again, it's a big subject. But today it's just, how does it play out in a human being? Now, as I go through these 7 rays with you, the truth is you're going to recognize them all on some level. There's going to be elements of each ray that you're going to relate to in your own inner life, and that's because all of the rays are playing out through you in a certain sense, but there is one particular ray that is the sacred ultimate ray, and that's the deepest in you. It's your soul nature, and that's the one that carries on from life to life. But for instance, you have another ray that is the animating principle underlying your personality, your lower self. And so you even have there's a ray that's governing your emotional life as well, and your mental life. But what's really important is, what is that soul ray? And secondarily, what is that personality ray? And how does the combination of those two, how do they work together or not? A lot of times the personality will resist the promptings of the soul. And so to know your soul ray and your personality ray ultimately provides you 2 key pieces of information. It gives you an understanding of how does the soul, How does it, what's it trying to express through, and how would that look if it were done effectively without or with minimal distortion? But also the nature of the inner conflict between the higher self and the lower self is also to some extent determined by the rayological dynamics between the soul ray and the personality ray. Let's say a person had a third ray soul and a seventh ray personality. That creates an inner tension of evolution that is different than if it were a third ray soul and a fourth ray personality. So this whole subject is a division of the esoteric philosophy called esoteric psychology. Okay? With that kind of context in mind, let me start to take you on a journey through these 7 rays. Again, you're going to recognize all of them, but be alert to the deepest part of you, and the ray that you think is the deeper part of you and the more true to your spiritual nature. Now, the first ray is called the ray of will and power. Will and power. And it's interesting because sometimes the people don't realize that will is as sacred as love. Will is as sacred as love, and the energy of will, all of us can relate to it. We can invoke will in our lives, but there are some people who are spiritually oriented who the nature of will is the nature of their fundamental beingness, as opposed to, oh, I need a little bit more will to get through this difficult challenge in my life. It's already there. People that are first-ray souls who are on the path, and by the way, as I go through this, I will be talking about people that are awake, well on the path, and functioning through their soul ray, okay? Because as I say, a huge masses of people have not yet awoken to the soul, okay? So first-ray people are people that innately have a tendency to want to serve humanity through the execution of will and initiative. It's the will to initiate. Often first-rate people get things going. They assert the will to initiate. They are often inclined toward natural positions of leadership, whether it's leadership within a church, within a company, within a cause. There's a natural tendency to lead. And the societal structure that is most related to the first ray is government itself. Government itself. Government in any society, whether it's an advanced society or a primitive society, there's always an element of consciousness that is the urge to lead, the alpha energy of society. These days, with what's going on in our government, you wonder. I understand. It doesn't mean that these rays manifest themselves like this. They go like this as they evolve, okay? And so we're in a big dip these days in the first ray world. But the first ray is very important because it's the change agent. Now, some first ray souls have been called, in some of the ancient literature, they're called the destroyers. The destroyers. But it's not destruction just for the sake of destruction. First-ray souls have an ability to look at what's going on in society and the forms of society, or the forms of the way we live, and recognize types of patterns and forms that are no longer productive to humanity and actually are now counterproductive. It's destruction, but it's destruction on behalf of a higher construction. On behalf of a higher construction. So, I should mention also that these soul types are not in the world in equal proportion. There are certain types of souls that are much stronger in this time in human history. There's a type that's not even here in the fullest sense. There's another group that is pulling back. So don't think of these as just even. It's a tapestry over the vastness of time. And each soul type has a piece of work to do in the world, but certain periods of time, it is believed, need certain strength in certain rays and less in others. Everybody following me so far? You get this? Okay. Now, the first ray, all of these have negatives too, and sometimes when you really study this, you start to realize that you have to, sometimes you can recognize your ray type sometimes more easily from its negative than its positive. So a negative characteristic of the first ray, as it tries to work through an imperfect instrument, you may get distortions that look like wrongful oppression of others based on your will, or selfish will, or destruction for the sake of destruction instead of for the sake of higher construction. First-rate people can be, with the distorting element, it can also be their most egotistical as well. So there's a whole study in this philosophy having to do with studying the distortions of the rays, and that's called the glamours of the rays, because that too is a very, very useful understanding as you assess yourself. Okay, so the first ray is actually one of the rays that is growing in its intensity, because humanity itself is going through a radical change at this time of history, from a transition from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. And because of that huge transition, the first ray as an energy that is shaping human consciousness is really important to facilitate that impulse to change, as uncomfortable as it sometimes can be. So keep that in mind. Now the second ray is called the ray of love and wisdom. Second ray people, when they're really awake to the soul, are people that, number one, internally and deeply sense the fundamental unitive field, and that really a strong sense that we're really all one. Second-rate people try to serve humanity through understanding. They try to serve humanity through two social institutions most commonly, either the Department of Education, or they serve humanity within the realm of the healing arts. Many of the helping professions that we see today are really ideally suited for people that are second-rate people. I would imagine that many of you in this room would be strongly second-rate in your nature. This particular group of souls is strongly manifesting, and they are the people that are trying to help us see that even though we're in this transition and there's crisis, let's rebuild a higher kind of unity. These are the people that want to create unity. If I were to gesture each of these rays, the first ray gesture would be this. The second ray gesture would be this. If I just use a gesture to symbolize a way of perceiving things. The second ray is very inclusive. It's the ray of wisdom. It's the ray of love. It's the archetypal ray of the Christ. Actually, the Christ himself is said to be a second-ray entity, as was the Buddha. One thing I should also mention here very briefly, before sharing the other rays, is that I mentioned that this has a lot to do with your purpose, your ray nature, okay? Now, have you folks heard the term ashram before? Do you know the word ashram? It's a word that means spiritual home, okay? Now, usually when you think of an ashram, you and I will think of India. And so to go to the ashram, find the guru, there's your community. Guess what? That's not the ashram. Not the ashram. It's a good place to go to perhaps have a rich spiritual experience, but the ashram is not in India, and dare I say, it's not in Minneapolis either. Okay? The ashram is not out there at all. The ashram is deep inside. It is said in ancient literature that your soul issues forth from an inner ashram, and that there are 7 great inner ashrams. And those ashrams, your purpose, your spiritual purpose, is to be an agent on behalf of the ashram that you come forth from. And that's defined by ray. So a person that is a second ray soul, for instance, is coming forth from the second ray ashram, and that ashram has a huge agenda that can last over centuries, that it's trying to facilitate in support of the upliftment of humanity in some way. The third ray The third ray is called the ray of active intelligence and adaptability. It's a very strong, highly mental ray. People that are on the third ray line, when they're really coming into it, are often some of the most brilliant minds in society. An Albert Einstein, we believe, is a third ray soul. Third ray soul. The third ray is, in terms of its influence, it's a ray that's growing right now in terms of its incarnational thrust. You see, the third ray is the ray that also governs the world of business and economics. Some of the most advanced souls I've ever met have been third ray souls, and they've been CEOs of corporations. Some of the least advanced have also been CEOs of corporations. Okay, all right. But that's true, by the way, of all the rays, okay? But it is said that humanity, one of the big challenges of humanity today has to do with humanity learning how to get into right relationship with resources. Right relationship is the clue to the future. What is the right relationship that humanity should have with money, with resources, with Mother Nature? All of these are very much a third-ray question. And the ultimate destiny of that particular type today is to support the right distribution of resources to ensure the sustenance of all life on this planet. And that's what constitutes real right relationship when it comes to humanity and resources. We see the wrong relationship all the time. Why is it that 20% of the world's population consumes 80% of the world's resources? That's wrong relationship. Why is it that, I'm not sure if I have the numbers exactly right, they're a couple of years old. Why is it that 30,000 people die of starvation and malnutrition every day, while there's a surplus of food rotting in silos? I calculated that one time. I think it's once every 6 seconds somebody dies. Think about that. 30,000 people a day. That's wrong relationship. So people that are strongly third ray and who are on the path are inclined to try to create new patterns of structures that are very practical but useful to support a movement toward correcting that. Like, for instance, an example would be the movement toward micro-lending. That's a huge third-ray phenomena that's going on, okay? That's quite different than the first ray, quite different than the second ray, but absolutely as sacred as those two rays are. They're all equal in value. Third-rate people are also inclined to do, it's not just business. Many third-rate people become engineers. Many third-rate people actually are inclined toward philosophy as well. We think that perhaps people like Aristotle, Plato, Spinoza, these were great third-ray souls. And this, because humanity is moving toward this crisis period around resource and how to rightly navigate it to support all of humanity, this particular ashram is picking up speed because that type of consciousness, that lens, the more third-ray souls that can come into the world with that lens who are well on the path, the more that will have a shaping effect on nudging us more and more toward a wiser relationship to resource. Still with me, everybody? Okay. The fourth ray is called the ray of harmony through conflict. Harmony through conflict. And it's interesting because this particular ray, we are told that this ashram, this type of soul, actually is not in incarnation right now. But it is said that the last time this ashram began to externalize, it's what launched the Renaissance of Europe. People like Bach, Beethoven, Da Vinci, These were great fourth-ray souls. And their legacy today is indisputable. We're also told that approximately the year 2025, this ashram will begin to externalize itself. And so we anticipate that by the middle of the century, the first wave of fourth-ray souls will reach adulthood. And a new, renewed kind of person, human being, will be among us again. But having said that, it still is a very strong shaping effect around the world in many ways. For instance, the United Nations is said to be a fourth-ray entity, and its future is promising. It's going through its growing pains now, but the day will come. Much of the artistic world is related to the fourth ray. One of the interesting things about this is that I mentioned to you that social systems are living entities in a way. I mentioned to you that a country is a being with a higher and lower nature, but also keep in mind that humanity as a totality is said to be one entity as well, the soul of humanity, and that really that's the big player for us and service to the soul of humanity. But what's so interesting is that the soul of humanity is a fourth-ray soul. The collective, the totalists of all of us together, fused as a singularity, that's fourth ray. Harmony through conflict, not harmony and conflict. It's harmony through conflict. It's in the human kingdom, in general, where growth comes through crisis. Have you noticed? And that's not true. There's a whole different dynamics playing out in the animal kingdom, which is governed by different rays as a totality. There's a different phenomena going on in the plant kingdom, but it's the human kingdom that is the fourth ray. And why is that? Because we're the fourth kingdom. First is the mineral, next is the plant, third is the animal, fourth is human. Let me explain that a little bit. You see, one of the things that's so interesting is that as you evolve your consciousness and you evolve out of the animal kingdom millions of years ago into the human kingdom, life develops two fundamental things. Well, more than two, but let's say two core things. One is, in the human kingdom, consciousness becomes individualized for the first time. In the human kingdom is where consciousness is evolving so that you become aware of awareness. You're able to introspect. You're able to analyze your behaviors. You're able to reflect back into the past to understand the present. You're able to project into the future to try to anticipate. That's not true with the giraffe. The giraffe in the savannas of Africa, because the animal, its consciousness isn't at the place where individualized awareness is being developed. It's doing a whole different developmental thing. But see, the other thing that happens in the human kingdom is that as life evolves over the vastness of time in the human kingdom, over your many incarnations, not only do you discover yourself and you individualize and think as an individual and not merely animal instinct governing you any longer, what also happens eventually is that you, in that introspective process, you discover there's two of you in there and not one. And you have to be careful, because if you say that publicly, they could lock you up. What I mean by that is you discover that deep inside you there's actually your day-to-day consciousness, but then you start to sense a higher prompting. You start to sense a kind of intuitive truth, an innate kind of wisdom. That's what we call the awakening in this philosophy. It's a critical life. There's a particular incarnation where the awakening occurs. You discover your duality for the first time. For thousands of lives, all you've known is personality and trying to get that ego developed. But then eventually you wake up to this higher prompting. And then what happens is eventually you start to say to yourself, I think that higher prompting that I'm sensing is actually the person I'm destined to become. And so you start to say, I'm going to adopt some real disciplines in my life to do that. I'm going to start to meditate seriously. I'm going to really commit my life to service. I'm going to study to build my higher mind, and all of those things are good, and you really commit yourself to that, and all of a sudden the lower self jumps up and says, not so fast, buddy. Because the lower self says, I've been running this game for a long time. And that lower self says, just because you hear this little faint voice, you think I'm going to let go of the reins? Forget it, says the lower self. And a battle begins. A battle between your soul and your personality. A battle between your higher nature and your lower nature. A battle between wisdom and knowledge. A battle between love and desire. A battle between the future and the past. Harmony through conflict. Fourth ray. That's what I just laid that out for you to see why, as a kingdom of nature, are we collectively a fourth ray entity. Your personal soul won't be on the fourth ray line. That ashram isn't here. But collectively, we're all on a fourth ray line. Still with me, everybody? Okay. Fifth ray. Fifth ray is called the ray of concrete knowledge and science. Concrete knowledge and science. Now, this is also a mental ray as well, kind of like the third ray was, but a little different too. Fifth ray people, their lens, their way of trying to understand reality and serve, is they want to clarify truth. The fifth ray has so much to do with trying to discern that which is true from that which only seems to be true, between truth and pseudo-truth. Think of the scientist. You tell a scientist, you say, I believe this is true. The scientist says, that's an interesting hypothesis. Let's test it. So they go through the scientific method and either conclude, yes, it's true, or it only seemed to be true. You see? Now, not every fifth ray soul is a scientist, but as an institution, as an entity, as a societal entity, science itself is a fifth ray phenomenon. Now, but by the way, this particular ray is surging very strongly. And the main reason for that is that the sign of Aquarius, the most fundamental energy behind Aquarius is the fifth ray. I didn't tell you that earlier, it gets a little involved, but astrological sources underlying every astrological sign is a ray, at least one or two, sometimes three rays that are the essential informing qualities behind any sign. And in the case of the fifth ray, it comes through three signs. Every ray comes through three signs of the zodiac. In the case of the fifth ray, it comes through Aquarius, which is why the fifth ray ashram is externalizing so strongly. That's why science is on such a surging forward. It also comes through Leo. Leo has so much to do with, in the fifth ray sense, has to do with right discernment of who I am. And it also comes through Sagittarius, and in Sagittarius it's right discernment of the path. The whole story of the fifth ray is right discernment. Okay. Now, having said that, that ashram has a big piece of work to do in the world soon too. It is said that this century we anticipate, if the predictions from long ago are correct, that as a result of the rise of the fifth ray ashram over time, that science will come to a scientific discovery of the existence of the soul. And imagine what would be, how things will change when science says, yeah, we've proven it. There's something that lives on after you pass. And that is likely, if all things go according to how they're looking, to occur in this century. That's why you have such a rise in the application of science around the world to the study of consciousness. That's why you've got this huge growth in things like research on psychic phenomena, scientific research into out-of-body experiences, past life regressions. You didn't have that 100 years ago, but you have it now and it's growing. And we're told in the ancient literature that it's believed that the country of France will play a major role in that. Interestingly, remember, a country is an entity, and it has a soul ray, and it has a personality ray. And in the case of France, France is a fifth-ray soul. And so its highest nature has something to do with a liberating key for that. If the country of France can rise above its third-ray personality nature to live that higher fifth-ray, just like if America can rise above its sixth-ray personality to be the second-ray that it is. This country, by the way, has a second-ray soul, as an entity, as a second-ray soul. But it has a sixth-ray personality, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Let's talk about the sixth ray then. Let's move there. The sixth ray is called the ray of idealism and devotion. It's a love ray. It's a very strong love ray. Kind of like the second ray. Remember, the second ray is called the ray of love and wisdom, so it emphasizes a lot of heart. The sixth ray is another ray that emphasizes a lot of heart, but it's a little different. For a second ray soul, the heart is felt as a kind of broad, unitive, inclusive feel. It's like a sensing that underlying us all, we're one beingness, and from that one beingness perception, service is rendered. The sixth ray also has a tremendous amount of heart, but that heart, instead of being this broad, diffuse inclusivity, it's focused. So it goes focus, 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 and it becomes love of the ideal, devotion to. And so the sixth ray tends to aim love, or many sixth ray people tend to aim love. The sixth ray is, this particular ashram is now in retreat. It was very, very strongly evident in the Piscean era. In fact, Pisces is a sixth ray sign. We're given to understand that the ashram began to pull back in the year 1625. And we think that it has probably another 100 years to go before the full abstraction. Which is, by the way, why the United States is going through a huge crisis. Because America has a sixth-ray personality. We were founded on sixth-ray principles of ideals and freedom. And so the pioneering spirit is sixth ray. Our Constitution is, underlying it is the idealistic note of the sixth ray. It's the sixth ray is what's launched us to the moon. Although the fifth ray made it happen, it's the passionate quality of the sixth ray that created the urge. But now America is going through a sixth ray crisis because its lower nature is sixth ray and our ideals are failing us. So America is going through a tough time as it struggles to transform its lower nature. And because the sixth ray is pulling back energetically and supportively, we've got to start to think about ourselves in much more of a second ray nature, which is the soul of this country. And the second ray has a lot to do with recognizing the oneness of the human family. And the second ray has so much to do with recognizing oneness through an honoring of diversity. The future of America is terrific, amazing, if it can rise above the negative aspects that are emerging in its sixth ray personality today. The sixth ray also is the rule, as an institution, it's the underlying energy that governs theology around the world. Whether you talk about whatever religion it is, if you study religion, you'll find that at the core of most world religions, at the core of it, you will find a set of ideals and a sense of devotion to a guru, a savior, a text. And that's why, of all the social departments in society today, it's the Department of Religion that is in the largest crisis, even though we look out and say it sounds like government. And government's going through a tough time too. But religion is really in crisis because the fundamental energy underlying it is coming into, it's pulling back, and that's causing a whole kind of disruption. And it's why, of all the, you go, I teach in Europe, I teach a lot in many countries in Europe, and my European students, they always say, they love Americans, but the one thing they don't get is that fundamentalist theology stuff that's going on. They don't get it. But that's why Christianity and fundamentalism is so strong, because as a ray pattern pulls back, what happens is you get more and more crystallization of the old pattern and out of fear. And that's why fundamentalism is the only branch of any theology that's truly growing in a serious way. Go to many churches. This is obviously an unconventional church, but so this, I'm not speaking of this church, but if you go to a mainstream church, many places the pews are half empty, and it's just not the same as it used to be. So the whole thing of what constitutes religion and theology is in flux right now. The seventh ray. The seventh ray. The seventh ray has a few names, but the name I often use is, it's called the ray of ceremonial order and magic. How's that? Ceremonial order and magic. The seventh ray ashram is also strongly coming into manifestation today. It is said that we are moving into not just a fifth ray age, but a seventh ray age as well. We are moving from a Piscean sixth ray age into a seventh ray age, and the sixth ray is one of the things about the sixth ray. It's called the ray of mysticism. The seventh ray is called the ray of practical mysticism. Practical mysticism. And so we're moving into an era where grounding spirituality and making it real within the fabric of day-to-day life. Seventh-ray people want to redesign the world. Seventh-ray people want to, in a grounded, practical way, they would like to redesign how structures in our society function, how we coordinate our activities as a humanity in order to bring and support the best of the human spirit coming forward. And that group is rising in frequency, in their numbers today. Seventh-ray people are preoccupied with bringing spirituality into the seventh plane. Now, without getting into all of that, there are 7 planes, and the seventh is the bottom, physical. That's why the seventh ray is very much about wanting to make something happen. These are the administrators. These are the people that make things happen. These are the people that actually coordinate things to make things happen. A lot of people have seventh-ray personalities, but there's also a strong growing number of seventh-ray souls in the world today. Seventh-ray souls are the type that when they really, really are evolved, they can look into the field, into this very room here, and they could see the etheric field and the pattern and the movement of the etheric field, and actually be able to understand how to work with that field and its undulations to bring forth new ideas that have a much more effective way of getting grasped and grounded and brought forward successfully. The seventh ray is really quite an exciting ray to have emerging or cresting on the shores of humanity today. And whatever ray you are on, the more you can bring the seventh ray into your life, the better you're going to be, better off you're going to be, because the larger living system is going to be strong. I'll tell you what, the 3 most important rays in a certain, they're all equal in one sense, but if I had to take 3 that are the most important in support of the dawning Aquarian age, it's the second ray, the fifth ray, and the seventh ray. Those would be the most important. As I say, I teach in several countries, and there's a couple places in the world where there are certain nations that we believe have seventh-ray souls, or regions. So, for instance, one of the places I teach is in New Zealand. New Zealand is a seventh-ray country, we believe. I also find that Canada has a lot of seventh ray in it. There's an orderliness to seventh ray. The seventh ray is organization and orderliness. And And the Scandinavian countries, all the Scandinavian countries have strong seventh-ray tendencies in them. Minnesota, Scandinavia, I bet you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So I always tell my students in New Zealand, I always say, look, your day is coming. Because that's a culture who's in the culture, there's a natural seventh-ray tendency. And if that exists at the time that humanity as a whole is slowly coming into a more emphasized seventh-ray quality, countries like New Zealand, countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, all of them, their day is coming. I've run out of time, and I feel like I just started. So sorry. But anyway, listen, thank you all. I hope you, what I'd like you to think about is just, if this intrigues you at all, there's a lot of wonderful reading you could do about this to study about this. I'm also going to be doing some work next weekend about this, and it's called The Forerunner of the Light, a seminar on this, and we will be getting into these 7 rays in greater detail in terms of service, but it's at least an introduction for you. So thank you all for allowing me to share this with you today. Thank you. So we'll just close with a very brief alignment. I'd like you to be thinking about the idea that there are 7 types of souls. I suspect that there's representation from all of the ashrams, or except for the 4th ray ashram, in this room right now. And yet we're all holding hands because in the big picture it's all one. It's one manifested as 7, and you all have an incredibly important role to play in terms of the upliftment of humanity through the lens that you see life through. So let's just be very still and hold that realization for a moment. And now let us close by chanting an Om together as one. Thank you and blessings to all of you.